Chapter 6. Envy is the seat of evil. True are preaching the Christ through envy and rivalry, but others also through goodwill. But the former do it out of contentiousness, not with a pure motive, for they are supposing to stir up tribulation. Philippians 1:15 and 17. In the morning before their departure, Damianos, Antonio, and Constanzo were having a light breakfast composed of a piece of bread with some fresh milk and cheese. There were also some fruit in the basket that adorned the middle table of the refectory of the maison.
"We should not have cut your retread short, Antonio," Damianos remarked. "It was important for you to complete the days of seclusion and contemplation before entering seminary."
"Yes, I heard you say so last night, Damianos. Yet, what could be more profitable for the advancement of my studies than spending the time with the young Bishop of Luçon? Aside from which, the bishop was intending to travel down to Belcastro to visit with our family. Could I do with otherwise than offer to accompany him?"
"Correction, Antonio," Damianos rebuked. "The young bishop offered to have you to escort him to your family home. You could have refused."
Antonio looked at Damianos agape. "Are you serious? How could a humble priest of my station refuse a request from the Pope's bishop?"
"The Lord has always given you the choice of life you wish to lead, Antonio. God will give you options, and you may choose to pursue your desire or his desire. In this case, I believe his desire was for you to complete your term of contemplation before entering the seminary. You needed proper preparation, and leisure travel with the Bishop of Luçon was not prescribed as a contemplative time, I believe."
"Once again I have to say that I heard you, Damianos. Yet I chose not to continue the retreat for the sole reason that I believe I have much to gain from the bishop's teachings. Unlike the monsieur who so kindly oversees our studies and contemplation, the bishop is young and sage before his years, I have been told. I firmly believe that Constanzo and I will learn much from travelling with the bishop in the next 3 days."
"Let me remind you that preaching through envy and rivalry yields no learning, and learning out of contention provokes tribulation amongst the sheep of your flock."
"Yes, Damianos, this is true. However, I am not intending to preach out of envy."
"You do not understand, son,"
Damianos cut in, drinking the last of his bowl of milk.
"I was not describing your intentions, but those of the young bishop. I am sure you will discover in time that Armé Duplessis had ulterior motives when he said he wanted to meet your family. He is an envious young man, Antonio."
"He's thirsty for power and dominance," Constanzo remarked, before biting into an apple that he had grabbed from the basket. "How do you know this?" Antonio challenged, looking at his big brother defiantly. "I was talking to Father Muriel last night after Vesper. He told me that the bishop had studied much of the scriptures, as one would thought he should, but he also concentrated on the study of the political administration of Europe in times past. Amongst many of his briefs, he wrote the Christian Instruction earlier this year, in which he condemns our celebration for the marriage among members of our flocks as debaucheries. So I would suggest that we listen to the bishop before we speak, for our words may be considered as debauched or disrespectful when not to Armand Duplessis' liking." Antonio was dumbfounded. I thought I could learn from who appeared to be a true Christian and a great sage. However, as it appears today, we are to be careful of even the queries we pose. How deplorable!
"Not so deplorable as the fact that the bishop wanted and still desires to learn how your uncle Gaspar managed to sway the Vatican without trickery or falsehoods."
"I have now to assume the fact that you dislike the bishop as true, isn't it, Damianos?"
"Yes, Antonio, as I told you last night, he will not be liked, but he will be needed in years to come. Thus, beware of his speech at all times."
As the 4 men were riding down the long road toward Belcastro, which they would reach in 3 days, the bishop seemed pensive and evasive in the few words he spoke. "What happened to your arm, Bishop?" Constanzo asked, fixing his gaze on Armand's bandaged limb. "The most intolerable medical treatment of all, Constanzo," His Eminence replied distractedly. "Have you been ill, then?" Antonio queried. Yes, you see, I have suffered from terrible headaches since childhood. No one could tell me what could provoke such symptoms. Therefore I put my faith in the Queen of France when she recommended to my mother for me to visit the Medical Institute in Salerno, and upon being examined thoroughly, the medical man told me that the only way to relieve me from these infernal headaches was to relieve me of 2 bottles full of my blood." "And they did?" Constanzo asked, visibly astonished. I mean, these medical men dared take so much of your blood? Absolutely, I let them do this horrible treatment upon my person because my mother and I believed in the Queen's knowledge of medicine. Is she a medical person herself? Antonio asked. Oh no, but her family is issued of medical practitioners. Even her name is a testimony of this. De medici is the plural of the Italian name medico, which refers to the medical person in the region. So you see, brothers, I had all the reasons in the world to believe Her Highness's prior knowledge, or I should say, acquaintance with my ailments.
And how do you feel now, Bishop?
Damianos asked. Relief would be an apt description of my state of being, although I felt somewhat weak before I had a restoring meal this morning. Now I am quite vigorous.
Then one would have to conclude Her Highness was not far wrong when she recommended that you visited the medical institute, was she?
I suppose I would have to admit such a thing is the case, yes, Armand admitted reluctantly. Nevertheless, I will reserve judgment for the time being. Should one of these dreadful headaches come back in the next few days, I will have to dismiss the treatment totally. As they returned to watching the road from the carriage's window, Armand broke into a broad smile. Antonio was the first to notice this. Have you seen something interesting, Bishop? He asked. Oh, no, not particularly interesting, but this road and the surrounding landscape reminds me of the village of Luçon. Does it now? Constanzo said. Would you mind describing the bishopric you have thus inherited through your recent ordination? Not at all, Constanzo. The diocese of Luçon is perhaps the dirtiest in France. It has suffered much from religious skirmishes over the years. There were battles between Catholics and Protestants. The region is largely disinherited, partly covered of marshes which go down to the nearby sea. The roads are no roads really, they are sinuous tracks going from one molehill to another. The environs are not endowed to large farms, only little huts, sparsely distributed over the landscape and practically never gathered in hamlets. There are a few wheat fields here and there, and a few cattle or sheep can be seen in some of the pastures.
Are you saying there are no fertile parcels throughout the land? Damianos asked.
Oh, no, Armand replied. The eastern part of the valley represents a plain that is quite fertile for the cultivation of cereal grains. He fell silent for a moment and then went on. During one of my visits I could not ignore the doubtful habits of the priests. They were literally dispensing from religious practices. Some of the priests were simply nominated to their posts by recommendations from the populace, while no one bothered to verify their capacity or knowledge of the scriptures. Is this why you wrote the Christian instructions? Antonio asked. Absolutely. I had to wake their senses of duty and remind them of their vows of humility and patrimony. I had to put a stop to these priests' entertainments, such as inviting concubines to their domicilies, drink in excess, and participate in the popular celebrations without any restraints.
And you had a chance to hear the results of your recommendations, Bishop?
Damianos inquired. Partly, yes. You see, poverty is not an excuse for this misconduct. Respect of the Lord and of his precepts will be seen as worthy of rewards. Rewards I fully intend to give to the deserving members of the clergy upon my return to France. As the sun was setting at their backs, they arrived in the small village of Potenza, a third of the way down to Belcastro. The local public house looked well appointed without being ostentatious. Since the bishop did not speak Italian fluently and the local inhabitants didn't converse in Latin as most priests did at the time, Constanzo addressed the publican first as the four men entered the inn.
My lord, shall we be blessed tonight? The burly fellow said from over the counter. We have no less than 4 priests about our house this evening.
He turned to smile at the woman standing behind him.
What can I serve you, fathers?
A drink of your finest ale, my good man, Constanzo said. Unless you serve wine in your house. We do serve wine, yes, father, we do, the woman replied, nudging the man, probably her husband, in the ribs and shoving him aside. We have a beautiful red wine from the valley, which I think you will enjoy. Not unless you serve dinner with the wine, we will not, Constanzo replied, throwing a smirk in the bishop's direction. I will do that, my good sirs, if some mutton and the finest of vegetables from the garden make a suitable meal for you. With a loaf of bread, that will satiate our hungry stomachs, yes. After dinner we will need a room to spend the night. We'd be very grateful if you do have such.
Yes, we do, father,
the owner said, as he came back to his wife's side after serving a couple of curious patrons at the other end of the bar.
We will refresh the rooms while you have dinner, he added. Please choose any table you wish. Lisa will serve you.
He then went round the counter and extended an arm toward a table near the back of the room. Later that night, Damianos joined the brothers in their room.
"I think it is time for us to return to your present, Antonio. We will return to this era in a few years, perhaps."
"Okay," Constanzo was quick to agree. "I don't think the priesthood is for me."
"Well said, Constanzo," Damianos told him. "You didn't pursue your religious career far beyond a year after Armand's visit of your family in Belcastro."
"Too much of a rebel, was I?"
"No, Constanzo, you preferred marriage to celibacy,"
Damianos replied, grinning. And with these words, Damianos snapped his fingers for the three of them to return to their ghostly state of an era far into the future from 1607.